African Ascent International is simply thrilled to bring a special guest to thousands of viewers who are already anxious to see this new voice of her generation speak to them. Cornel West and I have had the special honor of having had Yara Shahidi, an extraordinary student, in two different classes that we taught. My memory of her as one of my 6 students at an Africana philosophy course that I taught at Harvard, I believe in 2019, is that of a very brilliant mind, judicious, humble, balanced, mature, and capable of handling contradictions without necessarily pushing human beings to the extremes and creating unnecessary conditions in which hate and misunderstanding grows. I remember her when I gave her several difficult subjects to present. How judicious the presentation was, and what is even more, which is atypical of great minds, she does not take her gifts for granted. She's extremely hardworking. So, to repeat myself, African Ascent International is really honored to bring Yara Shahidi with those 2 beautiful names that resonate with me linguistically, and have her talk with us for the next 45 minutes or more on various subjects. Welcome to African Ascent International, Ms. Yara Shahidi.
Thank you for having me back, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
So, what I thought we should begin with, Yara, is for you to talk about your career. I could say many, many things about you, that you are a notable actress who began growing as early at the age of 10, was appeared in well-known shows such as Blackish, Grownish, I think it's called, and many, many major and minor views and films, I mean. And the last one, I believe, is a film that you did for Disney. That's what my studio manager, Patrick Doyle, informed me. And he's one of your fans. He's the one who's been insisting that I take whatever time I need to take to bring you to African Ascent International. And as you just heard them, we're also planning to bring you to our fabulous studio in due time when you're available in Boston. So why don't we begin talking about your career first?
Yes, well, I'm grateful that we're talking after the actor strike, because I can now actually mention TV shows and movies that I've been in. But, I really started at a really quite a young age. I started in commercials and print ads. I was only about 3 years old. And then I stepped into movies at 7. My first show, Blackish, I was 13, and I've been playing the character of Zoe Johnson for 10 years now. We're just wrapping up our final season of Grownish in the next 2 months. And so that'll be my final goodbye to Zoe, which is a character I've grown up with. But, along that, I think what's made my career notable is the fact that my parents have always prioritized us living our full lives. And so even though I was a full-time actor, they always shared the importance of our education, gave me space to make sure that my education came first and that I was able to explore my curiosities. And I think that's what really is what brought me to Harvard and brought me to your class, was this fact that I was able to develop a deep love of history and connect even the stories I was able to tell on screen with my curiosity and passion to learn more about my own cultures, the cultures around us. And so by the time it came to go to college, I knew immediately that I wanted to go study in social studies and African American studies and really take the time to deepen my knowledge in things that I'd been discussing publicly forever, at least in regards to, being forward facing, talking about the importance of representation on TV. It was really important for me to take those 4 years to professionally study the Black liberation movements and everything that happened to even get us to a space where we were able to have a show like Blackish on air.
And I have been following your career with great curiosity, as are some of my colleagues. For example, there is a good friend of mine, Professor Neil Roberts, who is Jamaican, who is now dean at University of Massachusetts. Maybe mistaking the position in which he is in. I think it's at either Hampshire College or University of Massachusetts. Anyway, whatever that may be. He informed me that your thesis at Harvard was one of my heroes, that we in philosophy describe as the Kant of the Black world. Because she's so schematic in her presentations, very axiomatic. She's interested in ontology, epistemology, so forth. And I would like us to talk about your thesis. Take your time, introduce the author on whom you wrote, and the content, and what drew you to it, and think is the relevance of the contributions of Sylvia Wynter to the understanding of the human condition.
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about my thesis. I haven't had the opportunity to in a while, but really, my thesis topic began, I'd have to say, developing in my sophomore year of college, because at Harvard, while you're in the social studies program, your sophomore year is not only when you declare what you want to continue to study with some specificity, but it's also when you have to take what they call the class is Soc 10. And it's where you learn about all major philosophers. Now, I think as we know, that list does not include many global voices until you get to the later years, but you spend an entire year studying everyone from Hobbes to Locke to Kant to 4 weeks on Karl Marx. And one thing that was really bothering me was the idea that not many of these people went on to live great lives, in that they all really struggled with what they were discovering about the world. And so many times their stories, after contributing these books that we read hundreds of years later, their stories end with how they ended up becoming a recluse, how they never had a happy life. And, as a social studies student, I just personally really struggled with that of, well, then what is the journey that I'm on? If I've made it my job to study these people and to learn their ideas, what am I trying to do with this information? And how useful is it to learn so much about the world only to choose to not participate in the world? And so I say all that to say, I feel like it was that year and being so disheartened by the lives of the people I was reading about, that it was really important for me to turn to global voices, to Black and Brown voices, because I think in so much of the material, not to generalize, but to generalize, there is an urgency to wanting to find out a better way to live, to knowing that you have to participate in the world around you. And so how do we make the most of it? And in that, even in the most dire descriptions of our world, there is a sense of optimism of saying, I'm only doing this work because I believe in our ability to land somewhere better. And so for me, your class and other classes were a really necessary disruption to kind of traditional Western philosophy, in which I felt like we were looking at thinkers that considered quality of life, and, as silly as it may sound, the importance of art, the importance of love, the importance of community, in ways that I think have continued to be really necessary to me as a young person in the world trying to find my own sense of joy. And so that is the longest potential preamble I could say without even touching my thesis subject, which was Sylvia Wynter, an incredible scholar. And I had learned about her I think maybe the semester before I had taken your course, Professor West had put together a reading list, and we were doing an independent study together in which he was thinking about people that theorize on the arts and the importance of art. And that was my first time ever reading any of her work, and her name even coming up. And I remember feeling so surprised that this person that has written such relevant work had not come up in any of the classes that I had taken until that moment. And so part of my project was selfishly wanting to use my senior year to learn about somebody I hadn't had the time to learn about, and to learn something new, but to also take somebody whose beginning career as a playwright really informed her theory as a scholar, because she understands the importance of art. Coming from Jamaica to London to California, she understands the presence of coloniality, both in a global setting and a US setting. And so it just presented this really ripe opportunity to kind of tie together all of the things I was curious about. And I couldn't say I walked into my thesis necessarily knowing what I would find, but really interested to say, if I were to really look at the depth and breadth of her work across her career, what is something that I could offer that is necessary to people that are, studying something similar? And so my thesis was at times a very tedious overlooking of and analyzing of her work, and where she gets and inherits certain concepts from, because she's so informed by Césaire and Fanon. But she does some really incredible things with how she, for lack of a better term, co-opts certain schemes and certain concepts and says, well, what if we broaden it? What if we loosen it? What if we... And so she takes things that we may be familiar with at first and kind of creates something uniquely her own. And so much of my project really centered on wanting to say, what is to be done with this colonial system that keeps manifesting itself time and time again? And what if we were to turn to a thinker that does believe that there's a world outside of coloniality, that does believe that there's a world in which we can undo what's happened? And so I look at kind of her concepts in which she spells out how colonial systems have come to be and how they persist. And then this really exciting concept she calls the third event, in which she discusses the idea that we kind of have two major moments in human society that define what it is to be human. And in those moments, Western society kind of has the power to dictate how that affects us. But she says, well, there's this third moment in which we can not only look back and correct what we've gotten wrong in the past, but look ahead to what it could be to undefine what it is to be human, in this way in which we can finally begin to dismantle colonial systems. And I think the last thing I'd say is that she also, in a way that was really fascinating to read, accounts for the fact that liberation isn't linear. And I think as a young person, that was really necessary to hear, because it can be super depressing to feel like, what do you mean we've been in this struggle for years, before I even existed, before I was thought of, before my grandmother was thought of? This has been this ongoing centuries-long struggle. And I think she values the importance of experimentation, of continuously trying to figure out what can get us to a better place, that allows us to even rebrand these moments that we may count as failures, as slidebacks, as no, really pivotal steps in this process of experimenting with liberation. And so that is my very long-winded way of talking about my thesis.
It is incredible, so fertile. Now, let me pursue that further, because I know you love to think, and you're simply a gifted thinker. In what way do you think, Yara, this condition of coloniality destroys people?
That's a great question.
About that. It's not a good condition.
I know I still have a lot to learn, but I think in the conversations we've had and my time at school, I think part of it at its most basic is that coloniality is a binary system. It sets to define people and things that are inherently undefinable. And when we think of even how mind-blowing it was to me when you introduced me to Zara Yacob and this new idea of rationality that wasn't so focused on the mind and wasn't so focused on these things that I'd been taught and by Descartes, etc. It was really interesting to be like, oh, there's so many thinkers that realize that there are certain elements of our human condition that are undefinable, that we shouldn't be seeking to place and understand so clearly. And coloniality at its core is a system of definition, of seeking to make known everything there is to be known by reducing it to its most basic. And so that's how we get systems. If I were to think back to having to read Durkheim, in which he presents this framework that I think is actually quite telling of the idea that with every introduction of something sacred, there has to be the converse of something profane as a contrast. And coloniality at its core, religious or not, has, in order to establish dominant culture as sacred, created this very intricate system in which it is hard as anybody that is marginalized as a Black, brown person to be anything other than profane. And they've created, socioeconomic systems, cultural systems, all these ways in which we're constantly kind of being reduced to the other. And even now, I think what's funny is we have definitely come a long way, and yet and still we constantly see the many ways in which coloniality is always seeking contrast. There's no world in which all people can just exist. There's no space for that. And so I think, yeah, and in my understanding, I feel like that is why we constantly are dealing with manifestations and remanifestations, and why coloniality turns into neo-coloniality. And I'm sure we'll deal with a new prefix soon when we realize we're still dealing with it.
Yes, I love that response. Let's pursue it further, because
Yes.
there is no limit to your imaginary power as an actress and as a thinker. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a sense in which one coloniality, which feeds on, as you properly point out, otherizing human beings, imposes itself on the so-called others. And of course, the word other is nonsensical.
Mm-hmm.
Strictly speaking, there is no other.
Mm-hmm.
All that there is a human being with all kinds of appearances that the human wears. Mm-hmm. Race, class, gender are merely appearances. So we have a self, mm-hmm. and historically generated appearances that human beings do not even choose to wear. Neither you nor I really chose to be this good-looking human beings that we are, because both of us are. I am the older version, and you are the younger version of human beauty. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that we brag about, because neither I nor you chose to appear in history the way we do. Mm-hmm. Of a particular sex, of a particular race, of a particular gender, as Fanon would say. But when first the colonizer otherizes the human, although, as I contend, the notion other is nonsensical, as if it's real, there's a sense in which the other was being abused in two ways. First, linguistically, and secondly, in real life, through poverty, through neglect, through abuse, so forth and so on. Without the so-called other intending it, the other becomes a monster. Mm-hmm. And when this colonial condition persists forever, the human who's been either otherized and is enclaved and imprisoned bursts out of this imprisonment, and there is no guarantee that the bursting out is going to be reasonable. Mm-hmm. Mm. Because the position of coloniality, which is unreasonable, in turn produces human beings who become unreasonable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it also plays into, to your point, what violence is invisible and visible, and the expert way in which colonial systems can enact consistent, invisible violence, or violence that's not seen,
See,
such that when somebody lashes out, it's like, well, where is this coming from?
yes,
What did I do to you?
yeah,
Uh, and I think going back to Winter, one kind of piece of hers that I talked about for a while and read quite a bit was on her open letter to Black academia. And it particularly centered on Rodney King and his being brutalized by the police in the early 90s that led to the LA riots in 1992. And there are a couple of things she says there, to your point. One, just this idea that, these colonial systems create what we deem as unreasonable, but also in order to succeed in them, you have to concede these things. You can't say, well, no, it's not unreasonable because what's happened before has pushed me to this point in which this is the only way I know how to respond. I've tried policy, I've tried talking, I've tried this, I've tried that. And so she was even saying to other Black academics that there's even a tendency with, I think, what we call at times respectability politics, to condemn our own people, our own communities for how they react, because, in order to succeed in academia is to concede to colonial concepts. At time, not saying it's required, but it happens so often. In order to find success, there's some sort of concession you've had to make, or something that you're interrogating, or something in which you can't fully say exactly what you think. But it is really interesting to think about these conditions that have become so normalized that the only thing that's deemed abnormal is the reaction.
yeah,
Versus saying, well, what if we were to imagine a different world in which it wasn't a given that somebody is penalized for how they look, even though they didn't choose how they looked? Like you're saying, like, what is it to imagine a world in which you aren't consistently condemned by economic systems? And if it's not an economic system, then it's a moral system that you're somehow failing at. It's not a moral system, then it's yet some other system that we have not succeeded at. And I think oftentimes, because of who is teaching, or who is able to set forward our history books or define our history books, not only are we dealing with invisible violence, now we can call it microaggressions, we can call it all sorts of things, but what also has been ignored is the very real history of violence from colonial people that, if we were to look at, was unreasonable. And so, I think about both being Black but being Iranian also, and thinking about the fact that, they some years ago released all these CIA documents that were supposed to be top secret, and as a part of being transparent, the US government was like, here's all these classified documents that we're releasing so you can see what we were up to. The US knew that in South America and in Iran, they were intentionally overthrowing democracy. They came in with the intent of overthrowing democracy because we didn't want oil to be nationalized. We didn't want agriculture to be nationalized. We didn't want people to have control of their products. They're jeopardizing these systems that have been created. These people are coming up with ways of challenging kind of the US hegemony. And so, these operations are created. And I remember reading these documents and being so surprised because, in my mind, I think where I give all people the benefit of the doubt is the assumption that even if I disagree with you, you wake up believing you are right, the way I wake up believing I'm right. And I try and keep that in mind, of being like, you're not trying to be difficult right now. You just truly believe what you believe, and I truly believe what I believe. And there's a gap in that. What's crazy about when you read these documents is you know what you were doing wasn't right. Like, you're not even coming up with a fake reason in these CIA documents as to why it's actually good for, this country, for Chile, for this place, for that place, to not actually have control over agriculture, to not actually have control over these systems of economics that would empower their people. And that was wild to me, where I was like, you're not even trying to give a reason because a reason isn't needed when there's no one that you're reporting to say, well, this is why, this is a moral reason why. You absolutely know, like, we're gonna go in, we're gonna shake some stuff up, and then hopefully come out with whatever we come out with. And so I bring that up to say there are quite literally moments and systems that have been redacted from our collective history that provide so much context. And I think the consistent challenge of any form of resistance, or whether that be an art or protest, is figuring out, to use Audre Lorde's, we know that the master's tools won't dismantle the master's house, but still, if everything we've been given has been limited and restricted by these systems, how do you find a way out? How do we give ourselves the space to imagine a different future, a better future, to work towards it? And I think that's even, the work of the importance of all this academic work, I hope at its best, is to begin to set the groundworks for everyone to dream. So it's not just that because I got to Harvard, I have the right to dream and be tasked with a year-long project of dreaming at its core, my thesis. But it'd be like, well, what is it? To give everyone the right to imagine a new world, which I think is also why acting and academia has gone hand in hand with me for so long in my career, is because in both spaces, it is an attempt at dreaming, an attempt at sharing in a dream. Sometimes it's more proximate to our reality, sometimes it's really far off, but the right to imagine something different, because I think that's what's most devastating, is getting to a point in which we are so subdued by what's happening that we can no longer imagine a different way of existing. And I think so many people, that hope has been taken from them, the idea that there's a different thing that we could be experiencing.
Incredible, Yara. I wish I could interview you for 4 hours.
Well, we'll set aside a larger chunk when I come to Boston.
So, yeah, that's what I want to do, because what we're doing now is so superficial because of time constraints, and you're extremely busy. So I have less than 15 minutes left, and I really want to use them productively. So I have 2 more questions.
Yes.
The next question, I think, really almost seamlessly follows what you were developing about dreaming and imagining beyond the colonial and post-colonial condition, so that it can think in terms of what Cornel West calls extracting from human beings the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
Because the possibilities of what human beings could become are so infinite. But the colonial and the post-colonial condition and the distortion of reason has a tendency, as you put it, to reduce human beings to these limited beings who can think outside of the imprisonments of the categories of race, gender, and sex, and sacrifice the depth, the luminosity, and the infinity of what it means to be a human being. And here where I think art and acting could play a major role. And this question is really meant to engage artists, because I teach both at the Berklee College of Music and, as you know, Harvard University. So my question is the following. Lately, I hope you don't laugh at me, I have been obsessed with studying Katharine Hepburn as an actress. I see a potential of greatness in you, exactly like hers, because her standards of what acting means and of what you could do with it are the best of the best. Very much like a very supportive family. She was lucky, as she puts it. She doesn't brag, like you, to have been born to families that nurtured her, that encouraged her. Once they sensed that she wanted to become an actor, they did not particularly care whether she was going to be the conventional woman who has to marry, who has to have children, so forth and so on. And she decided to forego all this for the sake of art. This is what I see you doing yourself. And not only were you a student, an academic student with great standards in that summer class that I was fortunate to share with you, but even now, as you're talking to me, I think what you're doing is you're using art to indirectly elevate human consciousness.
Mm.
That is what you're about. You are not the type who just a celebrity because you already is one, but rather informed by Sylvia Winter, your mastery of Fanon, Césaire, Zora Jacob, so forth and so on. You're demanding from human beings to think deeply. And you are constructing, I think, an uncharted paths for your generation.
Thank you.
Isma, and I mean it from my heart. I have great expectations from you. You're going to be the Catherine Hepburn of your generation,
Thank
and
you.
probably even beyond her.
I could only hope. I could only hope. I really appreciate that. I receive that. I'm really grateful for everything that you've said, and I agree because I feel like there's so much potential in art. And again, why I chose to discuss Winter in my thesis is because she's someone that values art as a form of future building, as a form of experimenting and shifting cultures, such that the rest of the infrastructure is willing to shift because we're so acculturated to new ways of existing and new ways of being. And so I think even on a small scale, the right to exist outside of who the world says you are, I think is the real privilege of acting, is I truly get to embody a different way of existing without being penalized. And so few people get that right to be able to experiment with who they are in that way without feeling, such imminent repercussions. And I think one thing I think about often, and I guess it's more of like an anecdote or a joke because I haven't thought too thoroughly on it. There are probably holes to this, but oftentimes I think about how bored Sir Isaac Newton had to be to come up with the concept of gravity. you know, you don't have to be, because if you're hungry and an apple falls, you're not thinking, why did the apple fall? You're like, oh wow, great, got an apple. And so the reason I say that is really because what excites me about creativity is that so many of our communities that have been historically marginalized have so much to offer in the arts and have already offered up so much in the arts. And I know that we've only hit a fraction of our potential because this is still before we have even gained the right to be bored and dream our biggest dream and think about the unimaginable in a way that our counterparts have been able to. And so I get really excited by, the more that we dismantle these obstacles to creating, such that it's not this exclusive art form, such that people can pursue all of their ideas and you don't have to give a reason why watching this person's story is important. That I feel like we'll really tap into and continue to tap into art at its best, which is to at times totally dislocate us from the world that we're in and transport us somewhere new to say, look, this is possible. This is within reach. If my human mind could think about it, imagine what collective effort could do to get us to somewhere different. And that's not just even in saying all art has to be so clearly about liberation, but I think just the act of creating and going back to what you said of the act of dreaming and being able to collectively dream is just constantly helps us push the barriers and limits of this otherwise very rigid system. And so I feel like that's why science fiction is great. That's why intimate stories about characters are wonderful. That's why comedy is great. And so I feel like I hope to constantly be in one way or another moving that ball forward or being of service wherever I can in that mission. And I feel like one thing that my mother taught me is that I think a common experience people have of her is whether it's a 10-second interaction or they've known her for years, she's a really great connector. So if you say, oh, I'm really interested in doing this, I'm trying to make sense of it, she's so invested in your journey, having nothing to do with her participation in it, that it's like, you need to meet with so-and-so. You should da 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 da. Have you thought about this? And so many people, I've watched how she has, whether it be in 5 minutes or through the durations of years, really helped blossom so many moments for people. And so I hope that whether it's me as an actor on screen, or just through the work that her and I do in our production company, that we're able to aid in that collective imagination and be one of, I think one thing that I think about often is that my goal is never to be the voice of anything. And at times there's a tendency to find one person that seems notable and be like, oh, wow, you capture sentiment in a way that no one can. But the goal is to be one of so many voices that it's like, can you even hear me? There's so many people with so many incredible things to say.
Incredible. Of
Mhm.
course, we have about 10 minutes left, I think, and I can't help but ask you to introduce your production company and most
Oh, yeah.
importantly, your parents.
Yes, happily. So
Uh,
our production company is called Seventh Son Productions. It's named after the Du Boisian concept of Black people being the seventh son, SON, but we changed it to SUN
yeah,
to talk about bringing in light,
yes.
the importance of piercing the veil, the importance of maintaining optimism. And so I am a co-principal of the production company with my mother, Carrie Shahidi. And I'm grateful because not only is it been wonderful to be raised by her, but it's wonderful to work alongside her. And I think so much of the sensibility that I move through the world with has undoubtedly come from her and has come from the foundation that my parents have set. With my father having started as a cinematographer and watching him be a director and a producer as well, and his work with Prince, his Afshin Shahidi, I feel like things that I learned at a young age, even from watching him, was this idea of the importance of creativity, of being able through him to look at the impact and feel impacted by an artist such as Prince, and to know, Prince really helped establish a really beautiful creative foundation for my family because he prioritized community. And so when my father was traveling, when my parents had first met, my mother was um while they were married, would be his camera assistant at times, and I would tag along
I,
to tour moments, and that's really incredible because you don't hear that all the time.
yeah,
Uh, that it really was a family journey. And so, I think from my mother, I inherited this deep sense of curiosity. She has an ability, this is wild to me, an ability to figure out where anybody in the world is from because she knows so much about different languages and different cultures that she'll literally hear someone speak for 2 seconds and be like, oh, wow, okay, that feels like Eastern Europe by way of this, because I know a ton of people migrated here at this point. It is an uncanny ability, but I think that deep investment in the world around her is something that I only hope to match. I think I forget, as much as it feels like a challenge and as much as it means that you leave yourself vulnerable at times to feel so affected by the world, to consistently be moved by the world around you is a really beautiful thing. And I feel like so many of the people that I look up to, both in my family and, these writers, are people that are moved by the world. That Fanon could have chosen to journal about his interaction on the train with the kid in Europe, and it would have stayed in his journal or in conversations with friends. But, these are all people that felt moved to share, moved to know that there was something that the people around them could gain from this offering.
incredible. And let the last question be, you promised me that we're going to travel this when you come to Boston and do it in
Yes.
our studio for an extended period of time. I can't wait until that happens. Do you have any messages for your generation? In many
Mm.
respects, I consider you to be
Mm.
the voice of your generation.
Well, I'd have to say I'm grateful to be Gen Z because I think my peers inspire me regularly. People are so creative with how they've chosen to be of service and make their voices heard. And so I feel like just by watching my friends, I'm constantly learning that new things are possible. But honestly, I'd have to say, and I think what I'd have to offer up, and this is more of like I'm talking myself through this as we speak. I remember when Professor West introduced the concept of what he calls being on intimate terms with catastrophe. And it feels like now that's where we are. And I know for me, it's been quite hard to be like, how do you take what's happening in the world and not feel bogged down by it, and not feel like there's nothing that can be done where we're so far gone. And I think the importance for me of always going back to read, of reading Zara Yaqub, the importance of reading Winter, the importance of reading all these people in my mind is to understand our history of being on intimate terms with catastrophe and how we have moved through it. It doesn't make catastrophe okay, but how the fact that we have indeed come to the other side, and how all of our attention on how we can make art the best it can, policy the best it can, how we connect with other humans the best we can, how we can avoid dehumanizing and othering people the best we can, is necessary work to get to the other side. And so I don't know. I offer that up as potentially a source of optimism for me. I know I always have to look back at history when it feels like, where do we go from here? To realize that generationally, every generation has had a moment, if not many, where it's, well, where do we go from here? And it doesn't make it any less daunting, but it makes it feel like, oh no, we have created and recreated the world 10 times over. And so this just may be our 11th time.
Incredible. I have to be very respectful of your time, Yara. You're an extremely busy actress.
No, I'm so grateful. This conversation was personally so needed. I love being able to, like you said, really follow a thought and interrogate these things that I feel like I've even set aside for a while. So this was really wonderful.
I thank you. And you have always been kind to me, and you're consistently kind. And I'm going to tell Cornel West that you gave us a treat to have appeared in African Ascent International for almost 1 hour. Remember, you had also appeared in the Tightrope. You're extraordinary. And this is the second time that you have appeared in African Ascent International. I've always dreamt to work with you. If you remember, I hope that
Yes.
one I will be able to do so. So thanks for coming to African Ascent International.
Thank you for having me again. I cannot wait for our in-person moment.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you again. I'm sorry for the time constraints in my schedule, but so grateful that we were able to talk.
All that, but you compensated me with such brilliance and vision.
Thank you for the questions. They got my brain going.
It doesn't take much to stimulate your brain. You're so smart, and you know that, but you don't brag about it. You just thanks. Thank you very much.